people choose a path for themselves. They enter by the black stone and they have to exit by the black stone. However, the path they choose during that circle, it's up to themselves, right? In the same way in this world, depending on my decisions, depending on what degree I do, depending on what work I take on, I'm choosing my decisions. I'm making my path in this world. And that path that the person dictates for himself while he's going around the Kaaba also dictates the distance between the Kaaba and himself. In the same way, when we go around in this world, when we make our decisions dictate our distance and our proximity to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Hajj in every aspect, whenever you look at it, is beautiful. In every aspect. You know that love is expressed greater in action than in words. And in the same way, when you look at Hajj, there's more actions than there are words. It's about intention. Somebody can do something to the beloved that outwardly doesn't look very good, but that intention that comes with it holds weight. In the same way, the intention behind our actions, that's what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala looks at. Hajj is about emptying the idols which are inside ourselves, the internal Hajj, taking out those strangers from within. And this is what Imam Husain alayhi salam eloquently says. He says, talking to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he says, أَنْتَ الَّذِي أَزَلْتَ الْأَغْيَارَ عَنْ قُلُوبِ أَحِبَّائِكَ حَتَّى لَمْ يُحِبُّ سِوَاكَ. He says, you are the one who has taken away the strangers from the hearts of those who you love, such that now they don't love anybody else. And in another dua that's attributed to him, he says, مَاذَا وَجَدَ مَنْ فَقَدَكَ. What is the one who has lost you found? وَمَنْ الَّذِي فَقَدَ مَنْ وَجَدَكَ. And what is the one who's found you lost? The one who's found you has found everything. He hasn't lost anything. But at the same time, vice versa, it works out. لَقَدْ خَابَ مَنْ رَضِيَ دُونَكَ بَدَلًا. And he said, he indeed fails who is satisfied in any substitute for you. In conclusion, before we move on to the presentations by the other Hujjaj who have been to give us their personal experiences. So when do we go for Hajj? Well, we go for Hajj when we're physically ready. We understand why we can be physically ready, when we can be physically ready. And we go when we've been invited, when we're worthy to actually receive an invitation from the Beloved to go to His house. However, that's the physical Hajj. That's the Hajj that's wajib at least once, so long as you're able to. But the internal Hajj is a continuous journey. That internal Hajj that you and me go on day in, day out. That internal Hajj of striving, in the same way as people strive between Safa and Marwa, you and I strive day in, day out to ensure that we don't fall into the traps of the shayateen and we continuously get closer to Allah. In the same way as in Arafah, we try to get to know Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. In our day-to-day activities, we try and know Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We manifest monotheism in the Hajj, we manifest monotheism in our day-to-day lives. We kill our illegitimate desires, those attachments we have when we slaughter the animal. In the same way, day in, day out, we try and kill our illegitimate desires. We try and detach from those things which we are attached to. In the Hajj, we continuously swarm around the Kaaba. In the same way, in this life, we swarm around our heart. We ensure that everything within is Allah, and that everything that exits is but Allah. I end with this tradition from As-Sadiq alayhi salam, and he says, Al-Qalbu Haram Allah. You may have heard of it, very oft-repeated tradition, that the heart is the sanctuary of Allah. فَلَا تُسْكِنْ حَرَمَ اللَّهِ غَيْرَ اللَّهِ. So don't let anything sit and reside within your heart, which is other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. I end this discussion here. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
I'm just going to speak to you a little bit about my own experience of Hajj. I'll just give you a background of myself actually, because I went when I was actually quite young. I went when I was about 15, and at the time I was living in Dubai. I've been living there for about 8 years. And as the Judge mentioned, it's quite easy to be a Muslim if you live in the Arab world. You're surrounded by your fellow Muslims, and the Muslim identity is almost like a casual formality. You're just a Muslim, and that's pretty much all it is. And when I moved to this country, it was almost refreshing in a way to change that into actually an actual solid identity, to be a Muslim. But when I was there, the whole Hajj story started off with my parents telling me, okay, we're going to go Hajj. We're going to struggle in terms of, you know, where we're going to keep you, we don't know where you're going to be, if you're going to live alone for that 2 weeks or not, etc. But the group, the Hamlet that they had joined whilst we were there in Dubai, it was quite a new one. It was the first year it's been set up, and they had a lack of people joining, and so they pretty much basically told my parents, okay, we're going to make the Hajj trip free for your kids, just please let them come, we have a lack of numbers. So we joined our family and Hajj going on this trip. The way I looked at Hajj at that age, as I said, I wasn't really into my Muslim identity that much. I was pretty apathetic. I did my prayers, I went to school, I studied Islamic studies at school, I came back home and it was pretty normal. So I didn't have any expectations at all about this journey that I was going to go through. And I think that was the most important thing about my Hajj, is the fact that I went there with zero expectations whatsoever. I didn't expect to improve spiritually, or didn't expect to not improve spiritually at all, or anything. But what I actually noticed, and what I'd like to summarize in terms of what my Hajj journey was that, to me, whenever I try to remember my Hajj journey, it's actually the journey itself towards the Hajj and throughout the Hajj that was more important to me than the actual destination, and in terms of the actual spiritual development that I went through. And what I mean by that is I'd like to split the way that I looked at this Hajj in terms of the spiritual development as well as the personal development. And although I know both of them are quite interchangeable, it was basically being with the people that I was on that trip and experiencing and seeing the things that I saw on that trip that changed the core foundation of who I am as a person. So that when I came back, I did approach life very differently. And this is what I mean by this. The group that I went with, as I said, was quite a new group. It was the first year, it was going Hajj. They weren't very good, they weren't very organised. And the people that they ended up inviting to come with them to Hajj were, a lot of the people that I can describe are not practicing Muslims as such. A lot of them were doing Hajj because they felt it was their duty to do it at least once during their lifetime, and it was almost an obligation that they wanted to get rid of. So it was interesting because you had it was the dynamics within the group that you had to work with. And there was always bickering, there was always argument, and the sentence of La jidala fil Hajj just kept on coming up. And for someone who's 15, who's just looking at these adult interactions constantly, every day, it was almost insightful in terms of, okay, I don't want to be like this. You know, this is supposed to be a peaceful trip. This is supposed to be quite a good trip in that essence. And it was also things, and it was a very cheap Hajj trip. I mean, I looked at some of the trips that people come to do Hajj from over here, and I compare it to mine. I had to sleep in a basement with 10 other people, and I had to share beds at times. And that was our accommodation both in Medina and in Mecca. It was very cramped. People got on each other's nerves very easily, and everyone had to take turns in terms of cooking, in terms of preparing food for each other, in terms of setting out and everything. And this is what I mean by the actual journey to Hajj that inspired me, because from having almost a cushy lifestyle living with my family, I was put through this almost religious, almost spiritual kind of training phase during my time there, because I was rubbing shoulders with people I'd never met before. I was trying to accommodate myself, and they were trying to accommodate themselves to each other's needs. And then slowly, as we started getting towards the end of our actual Hajj experience, it was almost like people had amalgamated with each other. Their vision to what Hajj actually meant had amalgamated. And slowly people started feeling much more at ease with each other, and it was great that way. And as for the actual rites themselves, I still clearly remember the first time I saw the Kaaba. I was walking with my parents, and I was just trying to look over. I was quite short at the time. I was trying to look over everyone, and I could just see the Kaaba, and then I was like, oh my God, I can see the Kaaba. Mum was like, just keep quiet, you're embarrassing everyone. I'm like, yeah. And then when you actually stand there and you realise you actually have to make that little bit of extra effort, not just physically, but within yourself, just to make it. It's very difficult for someone who's quite as young as I was to push through everyone and get to touch the Kaaba, for example. And I managed to do it with my parents. I managed to do quite a lot actually when I was there. There was the Ramid Jamarat. I think the year that I went was the last year in which they actually had the pillar. I believe now they've got a wall. Am I correct? That which you throw the Jamarat on to make it easier. And it's crazy because you've got people on the other side throwing stones.